In most countries, love follows a simple path. You meet someone, fall in love, kiss, and maybe one day get married. But in Iran, the rules are completely different. Here, a couple can legally marry for just a few hours through a temporary religious contract known as sigay, a practice that has existed for centuries. Yet, at the same time, something as simple as a kiss in public can lead to serious punishment. It's a place where ancient traditions, strict religious laws, and modern life collide in ways that outsiders can barely imagine. Behind the headlines, millions of people quietly navigate a system that controls relationships, romance, and even the smallest public gestures. And the reality of life inside this country is far more complex than most people think. Join us, and let's discover what life is really like inside Iran, where a marriage can last only hours, but a single kiss can be illegal. Let's go.
Number 1. 1979 Iranian Revolution. How a country changed its laws in 90 days. What happened in Iran between January and April of 1979 is one of the most rapid and complete social transformations ever recorded in modern history. The Shah fled the country on January 16th. Khomeini landed at Tehran's Mehrabad airport on February 1st. By April 1st, Iran had voted in a referendum to become an Islamic republic, with 98% of cast votes reportedly in favor. 90 days. The speed at which the revolution converted from a mass protest movement into an institutionalized theocracy surprised even many of its own supporters. Leftists, nationalists, and secularists who had marched alongside Islamists to overthrow the Shah expected some form of coalition government, a democratic transition that would incorporate their voices. What they got instead was a rapid consolidation of power by Khomeini and his allies, executed with the efficiency of people who had been planning this moment for decades. Changes arrived in quick succession. The hijab mandate for women in public was announced in March 1979, just weeks after Khomeini's return. Women who protested were denounced as agents of the West and enemies of Islam. The family protection laws that had given women divorce rights and custody protections were suspended. Alcohol was banned, music on state broadcast was prohibited. The revolutionary courts, operating outside normal legal procedures, began processing cases against figures from the old regime, often with executions following within days of sentencing. Western observers who had expected a post-revolution period of adjustment were stunned by the pace. Iranian citizens who had supported the revolution expecting more freedom found themselves in a state that was reorganizing every aspect of their lives with extraordinary speed and absolute certainty that it was right to do so. Así es la vida en Irán, el extremo país donde se casan por horas, pero un beso es ilegal.
Number 2. Iranian Women Rights 1970s, the generation that had freedom and lost it in 1 year. The thing that shocks most people when they learn about pre-revolutionary Iran is not the nightclubs or the movies. It is the specific legal and professional status of women, because by the standards of the region and by some international comparisons, it was genuinely advanced. Iranian women gained the right to vote and stand for election in 1963 as part of the Shah's White Revolution reforms. This came before Switzerland granted women's suffrage in 1971. By the mid-1970s, women made up a significant portion of Iran's university student population. They worked as judges, a role that would be explicitly stripped from them after 1979. They served in parliament. They ran businesses, practiced medicine, taught at universities, and managed government offices. In the legal code of the time, while not fully equal to men, women had protections and rights that placed Iran ahead of most of its neighbors. On the streets of Tehran and other major cities, none of this seemed extraordinary because it wasn't. It was simply how life worked. Women moved through public spaces freely. They appeared on television as anchors and entertainers. They drove cars, traveled independently, and participated visibly in public cultural life. Internationally, Iran was often cited as an example of what rapid modernization could produce in a Muslim-majority society. Then, the revolution came. Within a year, women were removed from the judiciary entirely. The legal value of a female witness's testimony was set at half that of a male witness. Minimum marriage age for girls was drastically lowered. Dress codes became mandatory and enforced. Every gain of the previous 2 decades was reversed through legislation, sometimes within weeks. The women who had lived through both eras described the experience as waking up in a country that had decided they no longer counted the same way.
I'm going to ask you a simple question. Are you a naturally curious person? If you're watching, I'm pretty sure the answer is yes. This space is made for people like us. To ensure you're always part of this community and receive all our latest discoveries, you just need to do one thing: subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to stay connected with us. Okay, now that you're part of our Legion of the Curious, let's move on to the next item.
Number 3. Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, the king who built modern Iran and lost everything. Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi is one of the most complicated figures in 20th century history, a ruler who genuinely transformed his country at extraordinary speed and whose methods and contradictions planted the seeds of his own destruction. The last king of Iran inherited the throne in 1941 at age 21 under pressure from occupying Allied forces during World War II. He spent the following decades consolidating power, navigating Cold War alliances, and pursuing a vision of Iran as a modern industrial nation that could take its place among the world's major powers. The 1963 White Revolution was his most ambitious move, a package of reforms that redistributed land, extended voting rights to women, reduced illiteracy through rural education programs, and accelerated industrialization through massive state investment. Oil revenues, particularly after the 1973 OPEC price surge, gave him the resources to build at a scale never previously possible in Iran. New highways, dams, steel mills, petrochemical plants, and universities appeared across the country within a decade. International companies flooded into Tehran. Military spending ballooned. The Shah purchased some of the most advanced Western weaponry available, positioning Iran as the dominant military power in the Persian Gulf region. But the contradictions were severe. The economic modernization created wealth that was grotesquely unequal in distribution. Savak, his secret police, was feared throughout the country for surveillance, torture, and the suppression of any organized dissent. Thousands of political prisoners filled Iranian jails during his reign. The Shah controlled modernization as a personal project, not as a democratic process, which meant that millions of Iranians who didn't share his vision of progress had no legitimate way to express it. That bottled-up opposition eventually found an outlet, and it swept him from power completely.
Number 4. Iran nuclear program. Why the whole world is watching this one country. Iran's nuclear program is arguably the single most watched, most debated, and most consequential weapons-related development in global politics of the past 2 decades, and understanding why requires stepping back from the cultural and social details of Iranian life and looking at what Iran represents on the geopolitical map. Iran began developing nuclear technology in the 1950s, initially with American assistance under the Atoms for Peace program during the Shah's era. After the revolution, the program continued and eventually expanded far beyond civilian energy research. By the 2000s, international inspectors were reporting that Iran had developed uranium enrichment capabilities, the same technical process that pushed far enough produces weapons-grade material. This triggered a confrontation with the United States, European powers, and the United Nations that has never fully resolved. Sanctions were imposed, the Iranian economy contracted severely, inflation hit ordinary citizens with devastating force, the cost of basic goods doubled and tripled. Negotiations produced the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, under which Iran agreed to limit its nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief. The US withdrew from the deal in 2018. Negotiations to restore it have stalled repeatedly since. As of the mid-2020s, Iran's uranium enrichment levels have reached percentages that experts describe as a short technical step from weapons-grade material. The country has not built a nuclear weapon, or has not confirmed doing so, but the distance between current capabilities and that outcome is smaller than it has ever been. For the entire Middle East, for Israel specifically, and for the United States, this is the defining security question of the era. What Iran decides to do with that capability, or what the world decides to do about it, will affect every country on Earth.
Number 5. Vilayat-e-Faqih Iran, the religious law system that controls everything. When most people try to understand how Iran's government works, they reach for familiar categories: dictatorship, theocracy, authoritarian state. And while none of those are entirely wrong, none fully captures the specific system that has governed Iran since 1979. The key is a concept called Vilayat-e-Faqih, which translates roughly as the guardianship of the Islamic jurist.
This was Khomeini's central political and theological innovation, and it remains the constitutional foundation of the Islamic Republic today. The idea goes like this. In Shia Islamic theology, the rightful ruler of the Muslim community is the hidden imam, a figure believed to have gone into a supernatural occultation in the 9th century and who will return at the end of times. In his absence, Khomeini argued, governance of the Muslim community must fall to the most qualified senior Islamic scholar, not as a temporary caretaker, but as a genuine authority with the full weight of religious law behind every decision. This concept was written directly into Iran's constitution. The supreme leader, currently Ali Khamenei, who took the position after Khomeini's death in 1989, sits above every other institution in the country, above the elected president, above parliament, above the judiciary. He commands the military, controls state media, appoints senior judges, and has veto power over virtually every significant decision the state makes. Elected officials exist and hold real administrative power in many areas, but they operate within a framework defined and bounded by the supreme leader's authority. For millions of Iranians, including many devout Muslims, this system is not considered the correct interpretation of Islam, but it is the interpretation written into law, enforced by the courts, and defended by the institutions that have run Iran for over 4 decades.
Number 6. Nasir al-Mulk Mosque, Shiraz, the pink mosque that turns sunlight into a rainbow. Every morning, in the minutes after sunrise, something happens inside a 19th century mosque in Shiraz that no photograph fully captures and no description completely prepares you for. Light enters through a wall of stained glass on the western facade, dozens of panels of colored glass arranged in geometric patterns, and as it passes through, it breaks apart into ribbons of color that pour across the mosque's interior. The tiled floors, the carved plaster columns, the Persian carpets covering every surface, all of it dissolves under cascading light in every color imaginable. Visitors who arrive at the right time find themselves standing inside what looks like a living painting, constantly shifting as the sun moves. The Nasir al-Mulk Mosque, built between 1876 and 1888 during the Qajar dynasty, was specifically designed to produce this effect. The architects calculated the angle of the winter morning sun, the geometry of the stained glass panels, and the dimensions of the prayer hall to maximize the light show during the early morning prayer hours. It was not accidental beauty, it was engineered beauty, and it works as intended every single morning. The mosque's nickname, the Pink Mosque, comes from the extraordinary rose-colored tiles that cover its exterior and interior walls, a pink so saturated and consistent that the building seems to glow from the inside even without sunlight. The geometric tile work throughout the building represents some of the finest examples of Qajar-era Persian craftsmanship, with patterns of such complexity that they appear almost digital in their precision. The mosque remains an active place of worship, not just a tourist attraction, which means that the atmosphere inside carries a weight and a quiet that makes the experience of witnessing the light show something closer to genuinely moving than simply impressive.
Number 7. Tehran underground parties. Iran's secret nightlife the morality police can't shut down. Every Friday night in Tehran, in apartment buildings scattered across the city's northern districts, something happens that officially does not exist. Gatherings that would be illegal in any public space take place behind locked doors, with phones set to silent, music kept just below the level that travels through walls, and guest lists circulated only through encrypted messaging apps. Iran's underground social scene is not a small subculture. It is a massive, citywide parallel society that operates alongside the official one with remarkable consistency. The logistics are sophisticated. Parties are organized through private Telegram channels and WhatsApp groups, advertised through coded language, and located in apartments whose addresses are shared only at the last minute. Alcohol, completely illegal in Iran, flows from bottles of homemade wine and spirits that circulate through private networks. Women arrive wearing their mandatory hijabs and overcoats, step through the apartment door, and remove them immediately. The transformation in the room is visible. Music that would be considered dangerous on the street, Western pop, Iranian pop recorded abroad by diaspora artists, even full DJ sets fills the space. Dancing happens. Couples who cannot hold hands on the street are together here without restriction. The risks are real. A neighbor's complaint, a surveillance camera, an informant, and the guest list, any of these can end a gathering with morality police at the door. Arrests do happen. Fines are issued. In serious cases, participants face interrogation and worse. But the parties continue, because the alternative, a life lived entirely within the rules of the public version of Iran, is something millions of people find genuinely unbearable. The underground scene is not rebellion in an organized political sense. It is just people insisting, at personal risk, on being human.
Number 8. Persepolis, Iran, the ancient palace that Alexander the Great burned to the ground. Few ruins in the world carry the weight of Persepolis. Built over the course of several decades, beginning around 518 BC, under the Persian king Darius the Great, this massive ceremonial complex in southern Iran was once the beating heart of the Achaemenid Empire, the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. The scale of Persepolis alone is enough to silence most visitors. Enormous stone staircases, wide enough for several horses to climb side by side. Towering columns, over 20 meters tall, many still standing after 2,500 years. Walls covered in carved relief panels, so detailed and so well preserved that individual faces, clothing folds, and braided hairstyles remain clearly visible to this day. Delegations from over 24 nations are depicted bringing tribute to the Persian king, a visual record of imperial reach carved directly into stone. The complex received ambassadors, kings, and officials from Egypt, Greece, India, and Central Asia, making it the diplomatic center of the ancient world at its height. And then came Alexander. In 330 BC, after defeating the Persian army, Alexander the Great marched into Persepolis. What followed is still debated by historians. The palace complex was burned. Some accounts say deliberately as an act of revenge. Others suggest it happened during a drunken celebration gone wrong. Either way, the destruction was thorough. What visitors see today are the magnificent remains of something that was once even more extraordinary. Persepolis was named a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1979, ironically the same year the Islamic Revolution changed Iran forever. It remains one of the most visited and most significant archaeological sites on the entire planet. A reminder that long before the current regime, this land was already one of the world's most powerful civilizations. Number 9. Cyrus the Great Cylinder, the world's first human rights declaration. Long before the Magna Carta, long before the French Revolution, and centuries before the concept of universal rights even had a name, a Persian king issued what many historians consider the earliest known declaration of human rights in recorded history. Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, conquered Babylon in 539 BC and immediately did something unprecedented for the time. Rather than enslaving the population, destroying temples, and forcing the conquered people to abandon their gods and customs, he issued a decree. That decree was inscribed on a clay cylinder, roughly the size of a football, in the Akkadian language using cuneiform script. Its contents are extraordinary for the era. Cyrus declared that all peoples under his rule were free to practice their religions. Deported populations, including the Jews exiled in Babylon, whose return to their homeland is referenced in the Hebrew Bible, were permitted to go home. Forced labor was condemned. Temples that had been looted or destroyed were to be restored. The Cyrus Cylinder, as it is now known, was excavated from the ruins of Babylon in 1879 and is currently housed in the British Museum in London. Iran has repeatedly requested its return, viewing the artifact as a foundational national symbol. Replicas are displayed at the United Nations headquarters in New York, formally recognized as an early precursor to the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The irony that this document came from the same land that today operates one of the world's most restrictive legal systems is not lost on Iranian scholars, activists, or the millions of Iranians who cite Cyrus as evidence that tolerance and justice are not foreign concepts imported from the West. They are part of Iran's oldest identity.
Number 10. Tehran nightlife before 1979. The discos, miniskirts, and freedom that disappeared overnight. There is video footage of it, photographs, first-hand accounts from people still alive who danced in those clubs, studied at those universities, and walked those streets without covering their hair. The Tehran of the 1960s and 1970s was not a fantasy or a politically convenient myth. It was a real, documented, photographed reality that anyone can find in archives today. And it looked nothing like the Tehran of the present. The city's nightlife was genuinely legendary. Districts like Jordan and Villa Street were lined with bars, restaurants, and clubs that stayed open until dawn. Western artists performed live. Iranian pop stars recorded in studios, producing music that competed regionally with anything being made in Cairo or Beirut. Discotheques played the same music that was playing in New York and London. Women arrived in miniskirts and platform shoes. Men wore bell-bottoms. Fashion magazines were everywhere. The social world was mixed, loud, and unapologetically modern. International hotels, the Hilton, the Intercontinental, hosted foreign business people, diplomats, and tourists who filed back to their home countries, talking about Iran as one of the most sophisticated destinations in the Middle East. The University of Tehran was one of the most respected academic institutions in the region, drawing students from neighboring countries. Film festivals screened international cinema. Iranian directors produced work that was earning recognition globally. For the urban middle class and upper class in Tehran, life in that era felt like participation in something global and forward-moving. Then, in the space of roughly 12 months between 1978 and 1979, all of it ended. The clubs closed, the music stopped on the radio, the miniskirts disappeared from public streets. An entire way of life was legally erased inside a single year.
Number 11. Mahsa Amini death, Iran 2022. The arrest that started a revolution. On September 13, 2022, a 22-year-old woman named Mahsa Amini arrived in Tehran with her brother for a family visit. She was Kurdish Iranian from the city of Saqqez in western Iran. Shortly after arriving at a metro station, she was detained by members of the morality police for allegedly wearing her hijab incorrectly, a charge that required no specific evidence beyond an officer's judgment. She was taken to a detention facility for what was described as a re-education session. 3 days later, she was dead. The official account said she suffered a heart attack. Her family, doctors who saw her condition, and witnesses at the facility described something different. A young woman who arrived healthy and was taken to a hospital in a coma with signs of head trauma consistent with a violent blow. The regime's response to the questions about her death, denial, deflection, state media coverage framing the family as manipulated by foreign agents, triggered something that years of political opposition had failed to produce. Within days of Amini's death, women across Iran were removing their headscarves in public and burning them in the street. Men stood beside them. Students walked out of schools and universities chanting her name. The protests spread to every major city in the country simultaneously, reaching a scale that had not been seen since 1979. The slogan that emerged, Zan Zendegi Azadi, meaning woman, life, freedom, became one of the defining political phrases of the decade globally. The government's response was brutal. Hundreds killed, thousands arrested, internet repeatedly shut down. But the movement did not disappear. It transformed into a slower, more diffuse insistence on defiance that continues reshaping Iranian public life today.
Number 12. Savak Iran Secret Police, the feared intelligence agency that silenced a nation. Behind the Shah's modernizing image, behind the discotheques and the universities and the international investment, there was an apparatus of control that left a deep scar on Iranian society, one that still shapes how Iranians think about authority and trust today. Savak, the acronym for the Organization of Intelligence and National Security, was the Shah's secret police force, established in 1957 with assistance from the CIA and Israel's Mossad. Its official mandate was to protect the state from communist infiltration and foreign subversion. In practice, its reach extended far beyond that into the monitoring, detention, and torture of virtually any form of organized political opposition. Savak's methods became notorious. Former prisoners who survived detention described systematic torture techniques, electric shocks, sleep deprivation, nail extraction, mock executions, applied to political prisoners who in many cases had done nothing more than attend a protest, write a critical pamphlet, or belong to a political organization the government considered threatening. Estimates of the number of political prisoners held at various points during the Shah's reign range from thousands to tens of thousands. Amnesty International published reports in the 1970s placing Iran among the world's worst human rights violators, specifically citing Savak's practices. The fear Savak generated was not abstract. People knew neighbors and colleagues who had disappeared. Conversations about politics happened in whispers. University professors chose their words carefully. The climate of surveillance and self-censorship that Savak created paradoxically contributed to the revolution's success, because when the Shah fell, much of the population had decades of suppressed anger waiting to express itself. The irony is that the Islamic Republic that replaced the Shah built its own surveillance apparatus, arguably more comprehensive than Savak ever was.
Still curious? Then don't stop now. The next mystery is already waiting for you. Just click the video on screen. I saved it just for you. See you there, curious one.